Hello, my name's Jason Kennedy and I'm here on behalf of Hi-Fi Plus to tell you about the Melco S10 network switch. This is a £5,000 or almost £5,000 data switch or network switch. It's an upgrade on the S100, which was introduced a few years ago. The S100 looked exactly like the top box here, and the so-called head unit is a modified or upgraded version of the S100. So while the S100 costs just over £2,000, the more than doubling of price for the two-box S10 is partly because you've got the separate power supply in a separate case, and partly because the switch itself has been upgraded. Melco have split this switch into two parts because traditionally power supplies are a source of noise, and the whole raison d'etre, the whole point of an audio network switch is to reduce noise, to stop noise getting into the streaming system. So they put a linear power supply into the lower box for, again, minimal noise, highest sound quality, and there's a cable that connects the two. They can be used as you see them or side by side. It's probably better. You can see on the back panel that one set of 4 ports is dedicated to 100 meg connections. This is the audio side, if you like. Audio streaming systems don't need high throughput speeds, don't need high data rates, whereas the gigabit side, the 4 ports on the gigabit side, are for elements like the PC, the router, and depending on setup, the server. If you're using the server with a separate streamer, you really want to keep the server on the gigabit side and the streamer itself on the 100 meg side. In situations where you're using a server that has a USB output and is connected to a DAC, such as the case with Melco's own servers or those from Ineos and other brands, you would connect it to the 100 meg side just to keep the noise at as low as it can possibly be. There's also 2 SFP ports on the back. These are for optical Ethernet connections. There aren't many streamers on the market that can be used with this, but with those that can, it's supposed to be a better sounding option than Ethernet cables. SFP is a fibre optic system. It's a bit like Toslink, and in theory you get less noise via that connection. There's also a switch on the back here that switches on and off the LEDs above each port. It's generally a good idea to switch that off. The only reason you need to switch it on is to check that a connection is being made. There is a single LED on the front to tell you the unit's turned on. That's all you really need, if that. The power supply is naturally as good as Melco can make it. It has audiophile grade capacitors and other components in it. It has a toroidal transformer and is thus a linear power supply, with none of the issues associated with switching power supplies. When this switch was introduced on the market, it was quite a surprise really to see such an expensive device, such an expensive switch. I mean, this was, I believe, the first high-end data switch that audiophiles could buy, and we were all a little bemused that anyone would spend £5,000 on a data switch. However, in the subsequent sort of couple of years, it's become apparent that noise is the enemy of good sound with streaming. It's the reason why streaming systems don't sound as good as they should. It's why they often sound digital. It's why they sometimes don't even compete with good CD players, when in theory they have so many advantages that they should. and the network switch is effectively the gatekeeper in any streaming system. Its job, well, this particular example's job is to keep the noise at bay and let the signal through. Peripheral switches, computer grade network switches, don't need to worry too much about the noise because PCs, etc. all work regardless of the noise. It doesn't affect their performance as far as we can tell. Whereas when you've got a high resolution streaming system, that factor becomes much more significant. The nature of the noise is it's RFI and EMI, it's interference that's picked up from the air and through the cables. It's produced largely by switching power supplies in connected PCs, in televisions, and in virtually everything these days. Both small and many large sort of domestic electronic components have switching power supplies which inject noise into the mains. Does that get through into the internet, Ethernet? That's hard to say, but the connected devices among them will be injecting noise into the network. And I don't think that just applies to the ones in your home, it probably applies to all of those on the same broadband network. So there is a surprising amount of noise on the internet these days, and anything you can do to reduce that appears to benefit sound quality. I think the only reason why people found it shocking that this was such an expensive and ambitious network switch when it was released is that in the past people haven't appreciated how important this part of the system is. We now know it's probably the weakest link in most streaming systems, so it's well worth paying attention to.